Margaret Foster wasn't prepared for the interruption, because the house had been still all day long, the kind of stillness that settles when someone has spent years navigating solitude with nothing but their own thoughts for company. And as warm water ran over her hands in the kitchen sink, she found herself thinking about nothing specific when the sound arrived. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? A gentle tap followed by her daughter Claire's voice, calling out, in a way that made her freeze, not from worry but from shock, because she hadn't heard Claire come back, and because her tone carried something weightier than a simple greeting. And when Margaret answered that she'd be right there, her thoughts raced ahead of her actions, thinking about how Claire used to be that boisterous girl who would thunder through the rooms, but had become a thoughtful young woman shaped by heartache, duty, and private contemplations she rarely shared. And when Margaret emerged from the kitchen, composed and present, she discovered Claire waiting with an old scrapbook in her hands, its covers faded and soft, her expression hesitant, as though she was crossing some kind of invisible threshold. And she explained she'd discovered it while organizing the storage closet and believed Margaret might treasure it. And the moment felt simple on its surface, yet carried an unexpected significance because the scrapbook held images from a period before sorrow, before the rooms learned to echo with emptiness. And as Margaret accepted it, she noticed an H bloom inside her chest, taking in how mature her daughter had become, how near yet distant she seemed, and how the basic courtesy of knocking rather than simply entering expressed both reverence and tenderness, not intrusion. And as Claire returned upstairs, Margaret settled onto the armchair, turning through pages full of bright expressions, family adventures, and scenes suspended in time before tragedy arrived. And the images flooded her with emotion, pulling up remembrances of affection lost and the unforgiving march of time. And she realized how long it had been since anyone had thought to ask about her. Not as the one who managed everything, not as someone who always kept everything balanced, but as a human who could crack and bend too. And that night, listening to rainfall drum against the glass, the knock echoed repeatedly in her awareness, not because it was unusual, but because it revealed a reality she had been avoiding, that both she and Claire were quietly aching for togetherness, uncertain how to ask for it, inhabiting the same residence, yet navigating separate struggles. And Margaret grasped that the instant mattered not because of where she happened to be or what she was doing, but because it signaled the initial fracture in the barriers they had constructed around their inner worlds. And as she drifted toward sleep, she felt something shift inside her. That the knock was not an unwelcome disruption, but a doorway, gentle, unfinished, and brimming with doubts that neither of them was prepared to voice just yet. Throughout the days following that knock, time seemed to accelerate but feel heavier somehow, as if something unspoken was shadowing both Margaret and Claire as they moved through the house. And Margaret noticed the shift first when Claire began departing earlier each morning. Her movements rushed, her salutations brief, and her bedroom door frequently shut, not out of displeasure but out of distraction. And though Margaret kept occupied with employment, household chores, and preparing meals that regularly went unconsumed, her concentration remained fixed on Claire, wondering if she had overlooked a period when her daughter required her more deeply. And during nights, Margaret would sit on the back porch with a warm drink, observing the street traffic and watching lights illuminate in adjacent homes, experiencing the quietude expand more than previously, and recollections of her departed companion surfaced unbidden, bringing back how the residence once felt brimming and protected, and how isolation does not strike all at once, but accumulates gradually, occupying every corner. And inside, Claire observed her mother from afar, recognizing her moments of hesitation, seeing how she gazed through windows or held previous items a touch longer than standard. And she carried a heaviness she did not understand how to manage because she treasured her, but did not possess the ability to communicate about suffering, or about the possibility that her mother might slip away into despair if she remained inactive. And one evening, as Margaret examined the scrapbook once more, she paused at a picture where she was grinning without restraint. And witnessing her former self produced something tender yet encouraging, forcing her to acknowledge how long it had been since she felt genuinely acknowledged. And despite having acquaintances and professional contacts, Not one of them understood the concealed portions of her existence, the nights, crowded with reflection instead of commotion. And across the passageway, Claire lingered just beyond her mother's entrance for a moment, listening for indication that she might speak out, yet the emptiness held her back, and she went back to her quarters, experiencing both closeness and remoteness at once. And as days accumulated, little moments reinforced the separation. Skipped shared meals, exchanged few words, used the same areas without actual interaction. And Margaret started to comprehend that the knock had initiated something she could not reverse, because it displayed how fractured they had grown while attempting to insulate one another from anguish. And one night after one more quiet dinner, Margaret made a resolution she would not let the gap widen into something impenetrable, because affection that goes unspoken can gradually diminish. And she resolved that the coming connection they made would include vulnerability and frankness. And as she extinguished the lights and moved to her sleeping quarters, she experienced apprehension mixed with encouragement, conscious that what followed would alter the dynamic of their connection. And somewhere else in the hallway, Claire felt an identical draw, both suspended in anticipation, both uncertain who would make the first move forward. Margaret resolved to reach out on a subdued evening, the sort where the sun dipped below the horizon faster and the atmosphere held a particular tranquility, and she invited Claire to join her in the den, her manner peaceful yet assured, and Claire complied without resistance, intuiting the importance of what was occurring. And as they positioned themselves across from each other, the expanse separating them appeared to stretch larger than the physical room, saturated with sentiments left unvoiced. And Margaret initiated by inquiring whether everything was fine, not as someone fulfilling parental responsibility, but as a person who wanted to genuinely understand. And Claire took her moment to respond, her fingers intertwined as though securing something carefully, and she disclosed that she was troubled about Margaret, that she observed how withdrawn Margaret had become, how she managed her everyday living without ever complaining. And his words astonished her, not because they were inaccurate, but because she hadn't grasped how perceptively her daughter perceived her. And Margaret underwent a change inside, an opening she had been containing for so long, and she communicated that she was recovering slowly from devastation. That sorrow remained yet transformed into something else, and that occasionally being quiet felt more bearable than expressing what hurt. And Claire absorbed this knowledge, her face displaying profound concentration. And she opened up that the initial knock had served as her method of examining whether Margaret was managing, lacking any other avenue of communication. And understanding this allowed Margaret to comprehend that the moment she had considered repeatedly was experienced by both individuals, each wondering how to connect without bringing additional injury, and the sincerity distributed freely among them following that, words flowing more comfortably once the initial barrier dissolved. And Margaret articulated her longing for interaction, her feeling that circumstances had halted following her companion's departure. And Claire divulged that she harbored dread about losing her as well, not through bodily separation but through psychological detachment, and the area seemed to grow warmer as the authenticity was absorbed, not sorrowful but liberating. And when the exchange concluded, the silence that remained carried relief rather than disconnection. And the subsequent night, Margaret remained thoughtful on her mattress, her awareness sharper than it had experienced in an extended period, and she observed a message on her device from someone named Marcus, someone she had recently become reacquainted with following an extended interval. And the communication was uncomplicated, simply wondering about her recent activities, yet it produced a grin that caught her off guard, because it indicated that her journey could still expand in minor, considerate directions, and she answered without hesitation, permitting herself to feel enthusiasm without remorse. And down the path, Claire prepared to go with companions, experiencing a reduced load, conscious that her apprehension had been recognized. And as Margaret observed the entrance shut behind her, she comprehended that the knock had rearranged something essential, not by producing perplexity, but by motivating truthfulness. And she understood that attention does not consistently emerge in eloquent statements. Frequently it appears in understated behaviors that ask without demanding anything in return. And as she dimmed the lights, she sensed possibility coming back softly, not in a sudden surge, but as an enduring power, conscious that both Margaret and Claire had moved forward, and what followed would be constructed on genuineness instead of protective measures. Throughout several weeks, the residence carried an improved atmosphere, decorated with hushed amusement and regular dinners. And Margaret experienced how Claire carried herself with increased freedom, laughing at easy remarks, keeping her entrance unlatched and settling adjacent to her without the strain of separation between them. And she noticed her own transformation as well, a comfortable development, a pleasantness she hadn't recognized she was desiring, as though the knock in the kitchen had done more than answer a door. It had delivered space for real relationship. And on one rainy evening, as Margaret arranged the meal, there came another knock at the entrance. And upon unlocking it, Marcus was there holding a delicate arrangement of blooms, his manner compassionate and somewhat uncertain. And in that instant, she encountered a sensation she believed had gone away, a subdued excitement of potential that existence could continue producing surprises and tender connection. And Claire, observing from the upper level, paused as she witnessed Marcus, comprehending without explanation that this represented a component of her mother's progression. And she grinned gently, acknowledging that the knock she had formerly delivered in the cooking area was divergent, yet interconnected, a representation of mindfulness and awareness that might take countless configurations. And Margaret welcomed Marcus inside, and they distributed conversation, while Claire observed, recognizing how spontaneously the exchange unfolded, how brightness illuminated her mother's appearance in laughter and private smiles. And she recognized her pleasure for Margaret in a manner that was similarly cautious and releasing. Aware that her mother deserved companionship and contentment following decades of managing suffering without sound. And eventually, when the residence grew serene, Margaret lingered in contemplation, considering the sequence of instances that had guided her to this place, bringing back the primary knock, how it had made her jump, and how during time it had matured into truthfulness, comprehension, and restored attachment with her companion. And currently it prolonged toward emerging connections with Marcus, a tender message that existence can be layered with bonds that honor what transpired while welcoming what comes ahead. And she recognized that affection and attention are not exclusively conveyed via dramatic pronouncements, but additionally via tiny expressions, serene consciousness, and occasions where spirits know each other minus urgency. And as she thought of Claire's maturation, her wisdom, and her approach to handling the weeks of alteration, she was filled with appreciation and reassurance, conscious that they had progressed jointly from remoteness to openness without hardship or emotional cost. And the moisture continued its subdued descent, calculating moments as she enabled herself to conceive of days containing discussions, distributed narratives, and the calm nearness of someone who could represent something beyond just companionship. And as Margaret positioned the arrangement on the surface and observed the unoccupied seat where Claire had recently passed, she acknowledged that the knock she had initially encountered with puzzlement and astonishment had served as a delicate inception, producing consequences that reorganized her residence and inner landscape. And she beamed at the comprehension that existence frequently encourages individuals delicately, instructing them to observe those who treasure them, to experience happenings without reluctance, and to give themselves permission to associate once again. And in such comprehension, she carried appreciation for seemingly insignificant disruptions, for behaviors that communicate more than language, and for the recognition that in many cases the most elementary acts like a knock, an exchanged regard, a warm expression can remodel connections and invite tenderness, affection, and prospect to go back into existences that previously felt excessively muted or excessively burdened. And as she turned off the illumination that nighttime, she embraced a tranquil assurance that the residence, previously loaded with emptiness, was presently brimming with mindfulness, attachment, and the understated assurance of roots yet to be discovered, that regarded the previous with consideration, encountered the current moment with receptivity, and permitted the following years to stay wide to uncertainty. And she was aware that circumstances such as these, seemingly inconsequential yet meaningful, would continue to be with her, directing her onward through the periods coming with understated optimism and recognition. And the recollection of the primary knock would perpetually persist, not as bewilderment or questioning, but as the transformative juncture that communicated to her that devotion in all of its shapes frequently comes quietly and reconstructs everything.